Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Ollie. I'm the director of the Making Every Adult Matter Coalition, which is a coalition of Clinks, Homeless Link, Mind and Collective Voice, working across England to help local areas transform services and systems for people facing multiple disadvantage. We've been doing that for the last 12 or 13 years, and we've worked with around 50 areas across the country so far to help them change their practice. What I wanted to do today in the time that we've got together is to talk about multiple disadvantage as a complex problem requiring a systemic response, and to think about some practical things that you can do in your day-to-day, and as part of that to kind of set the scene for the rest of today's conversations. So before we kick off, I just want to invite you to do something. Can everyone just cross their arms for me like you would in normally? Okay, and that feels like a pretty normal thing to do, right? But now what I want you to do is just look down at your arms and just notice which arm is over the top. And now see if you can turn it around to the way you don't cross your arms. Okay, feels pretty weird, right? So like one way is normal, one way is very abnormal. What I want to suggest is that if we're talking about multiple disadvantage today and things feel normal, we're probably not in the right space in our conversations. We need to be thinking about things slightly differently, things that feel a bit uncomfortable, things that feel like conversations we might not be having in our day-to-day. So as you're going through today, just think about the folded arms and whether you're in the right place in the conversations that you're having. I want to kick us off with this quote. It's from a director of public health. He said, "It's not troubled individuals, it's a troubled system." And it sums up for me exactly what we're trying to do at MEME and what we think about multiple disadvantage at MEME, because multiple disadvantage is not an individual problem, it's a systemic problem. It's a problem which is caused by the system in many cases and very often perpetuated by the system. It's not about people's needs, because people just have human needs, and our system responds quite poorly to those needs. So let me just say a little bit about why. This was sent to me a number of years ago. It's quite old now actually, but it's sent to me by an area that we were working with around multiple disadvantage. It represents about 3 years of an individual's life. Everything on the top is, broadly speaking, what you might call sort of positive intervention. It's intervention from mental health and substance misuse services and housing services. Everything on the bottom is criminal justice intervention, so courts and prisons. And of course, this will be familiar to a lot of you in this room. The issue here is, of course, that despite all this public investment in the individual, nothing really changed over the period of this individual's life, and from the beginning to the end, doesn't look that different, does it? So I use this to talk to people who don't know what multiple disadvantage is, just to kind of give them a sense of this, but it's going to be very familiar to everybody in this room, for people that you're working with and for. But let's just talk about why. So for hundreds of years now, we've developed our social welfare systems in silos. It's a very human thing to do. We like to categorise things into things that we can deal with. So we've built a homelessness sector, a substance misuse sector, a health sector, a mental health sector, a criminal justice sector, a domestic violence sector. And this starts at the top, right? It starts in the way that our government is formulated. It starts in the way that our ministerial responsibilities are formulated. And then it percolates down through the system. So it percolates down through commissioning, in inter-service responses. So you end up with a situation where local services are very good at doing single things, but not very good at working with complexity. And especially when pushed or when times get tough, they revert to the things that they've been commissioned to do. So they revert to supporting people quite often with singular issues, and to doing what their service does rather than what the person needs. These services are often designed, commissioned and delivered in silos, as I said. They're often built around the needs of the service and not the needs of the individual. They tend to focus on deficits rather than strengths. Just look at the names of these sectors that we built for ourselves. They're about problems, they're not about solutions. They lack a person-centred and a trauma-informed approach. And as a result, as I said, they can often add to, as well as cause, people's problems, and they're not reflective of that human experience of need that we have. So at MEME, what we're trying to do, and I'll talk more about this later, is we're trying to change systems from that kind of implicit sense of my service does this, do you want some of it? Which is so often the kind of underlying message that exists in a lot of our service practice. Do you want to engage with me in the way that I need you to engage at 2 p.m. next Tuesday? If not, we can't really help you. Towards a system which says, as a system, as a coordinated system in this local place, how can we help you move forward with your life in the way that you want to move forward? And that's quite a fundamental shift, and it's what we're trying to do in the areas that we work with. So we end up in this situation, this overall result, in the way that we've built the services, that people don't get the help that they need. They tend to be bounced around the system. Their lives suffer as a result. We don't get the best from our public services. Staff get frustrated. It costs more than it should. And we run the risk of kind of saying this is the individual's problem, when actually it's the services and the system's problem. And the political discourse and stuff can start to talk about this as an individual's fault rather than a systemic fault. So the big question is, of course, what can we do about it? And at Mean, we would argue that multiple disadvantage is a complex problem, and I'll just say what I mean by that. So 3 types of problem in the world broadly: simple problems, complicated problems, and complex problems. And the 2 at the top are actually quite similar. Despite one being a Robin Reliant and one being a jumbo jet, these problems are essentially linear and mechanistic. There tends to be a clear problem and a clear solution. They tend to be quite managerial, and they can be diagnosed and fixed if you know how to. So if you know what to do with the car or the aeroplane, you can find out what the problem is, you can find the broken part, you can plug it back in, the thing will start and it will fly or drive as you want it to. It's very linear, it's very managerial. Complex problems are not like that. So this thing at the bottom is a map. It's actually a map of an obesity system, looking at all the drivers of obesity. The problems there are interrelated. There's no clear problem or solution. It's not responsive at all, actually, to standard problem-solving techniques, and that's partly because you don't really know where to start with the problem. So, for example, if I was to ask all of you to write down on a bit of paper now what the problem was with multiple disadvantage, you'd all write something different. You'd all write things that were factors of something else. So we might look at how services work, or how services are commissioned, or what the political landscape around redistribution of wealth is, or how our societies function in terms of helping people to advance. It would all be different, and they'd all be factors of one another. So there isn't a sense of what the problem is, and there also isn't a clear sense of what the solution is. And these problems are complex problems, and they don't fit an action plan or a simple way of working. And the difficulty is that if we treat complex problems like they are simple, going back to that diagram with the silos in it, right? We're trying to simplify complex problems. We end up making it worse. So we need to take a systemic response to problems like this. It's not just multiple disadvantage, it's things like climate change and obesity here. Anything that requires a kind of complex response must have a systemic response to it, otherwise we risk making it worse. This is a quote from a systems thinker, and he's just kind of talking about how this is kind of built into us all. So from a really early age, we're taught to break apart problems to make them manageable. And this is supposed to make complex tasks and subjects easier to deal with, but we end up paying this massive price. We can no longer see the consequences of the wider whole. We can no longer get a sense of how our actions in our bit of the system are affecting another bit of the system, and we lose our sense of connection to the larger issue. And I would argue that that's exactly what's happening in the way that we've designed our social welfare systems. So let's talk about systems for people facing multiple disadvantage, or just for us in general, right? So everybody has a system around them. We all have systems around them. It's just that for people facing multiple disadvantage, it's a bit more kind of pervasive into their lives because of all the things that they're having to engage with. So systems are a complex web of interconnected parts that the people, the organisations, the processes, the policies, the drivers which are around people. So we can draw out maps of this, right? So we could sit down with an individual facing multiple disadvantage, and we could look at all the people that they're engaging with on a daily basis. We could look at the services that are supporting them. We could look at the commissioning policies that are driving the shape of those services. We could look at the national policy, which is driving the shape of that commissioning. We could look at the societal drivers right up to things like education and taxation and redistribution and political discourse that is driving the world out there in the shape of what we have. And all of this impacts on individuals every day in terms of the experience that they get. And the problem with these systems is that they act in unpredictable ways, and they tend to be built to do one thing and end up doing something else. So they have explicit purposes and assumptions in them, as well as implicit ones, and often they end up failing, and that's why we're here today talking about multiple disadvantage. So in summary, it's a complex problem. There's no obvious problem or solution. Traditional problem-solving techniques don't work. It's absolutely impossible for any one agency to do anything about this by themselves. Doing what we've always done, arm crossing, isn't going to work. So we need to take a systemic approach to it. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about what MIM does with that issue and kind of how we try and support it. And I want to talk about some practical things that we can do in our day-to-day, or things that we can open up in the conversation today. So we have a couple of frameworks. The one on the left is our MIM approach model. So this is the model that we've used to help most of the areas that we work with across the country. It's a 7-stage framework to help people better coordinate services and systems for people facing multiple disadvantage, and it has 7 bits within it. It's not prescriptive about what people do, but what it says is that if you fail to address each of the 7 bits, what you're developing probably won't stand the test of time. It starts off with partnership and vision and ensuring you've got co-production solidly within the frame. It helps people work out who they want to support. It helps them put a kind of intervention in place to make things different for those individuals, and then to look at the systemic change that needs to be made to reduce some of the barriers that are leading to that way of working. And our team support local areas to do that, and we spend a lot of time helping the network to learn and share from each other, and it's been a useful tool for us in terms of getting people together to tackle this problem, because at the end of the day, multiple disadvantage isn't anyone's job in most areas, and so it can easily slip away from the priority list. And the one on the right is our more recent systems intervention tool, which is a tool designed to help people tackle particular challenges in their system. So areas that are coming to us saying we've got an issue with how our mental health system works, for example, for people facing multiple disadvantage. We help them run through essentially a systems intervention model from build, explore, act and learn, to be able to tackle that problem, to be able to understand it in a different way and begin to make some changes to it. It's probably important to say that none of these things are like complete solutions. There's absolutely no way that there aren't problems in all of the MIM areas that we work in, but what we do have is an ability to create a space to bring some of this up the agenda and to give people a chance to talk about the issues together as a place. It's just a map of where we're working across England at the moment. So I wanted to talk about some practical things that you can do in the second part of this. We recently published this. It's called Reflections from the MIM Approach Network. It's a reflection on the last 5 years or so of our work, and it pulls out 4 or 5 kind of key ingredients that have been helpful for the work that we've done. I just want to talk about five things today. So one is about building partnerships, one is about making them effective, one is about new operational approaches, so sort of how individuals on the ground perceive the change, something about how we change and sort of open up that system, and a little bit about systems thinking behaviours. So first of all, on partnerships, everything that we do is based on partnership. We don't work with singular organisations. In fact, if singular organisations come to us and say, can we do some work on this, we'll say, only if you can go and find some partners who want to kind of come and be part of the early conversation. So, there's something about working out who in your local area shares an interest in this, who are the unusual suspects, who are the people that are not at the table, who will have different and interesting points of views. In every MIM approach area, we create these conversations at operational and strategic levels, and we tend to try and find a senior kind of home to oversee the work. So just on the right there is the kind of what the partnerships tend to look like in our MIM areas. So we have a group of individuals that we're supporting. We often have coordinators or navigators in those local areas that are sort of doing the day-to-day work for individuals. We then tend to have an operational group of service leads who are committed to trying to make things different on a daily basis. And then a strategic group of senior decision makers whose job it is to give a mandate to the whole thing. And what we tend to find is that you need all of that in a response to multiple disadvantage, because, for example, if you just put in place a new coordinator model, and I've seen areas do this, say, we've got a new group of navigators, but the system doesn't change, you just burn out the navigators because they're desperately trying to get the doors open to the services who are sticking to all of the old thresholds and things that they had in the first place. So it's about this different level of interaction and engagement and trying to get the whole area committed to it. The second part is about making those partnerships effective, and like every one of us in this room has been involved in partnership, right? And sometimes it's not a very productive or nice thing to be involved in, and often it's a bit fake. Often it's a partnership to get the funding bid, or a partnership because you've been told you've got to by a group of commissioners. What we try and do in behaviours is create these partnerships that are actually kind of really effective and able to lead the kind of change that we're talking about. So we try, first of all, to build a partnership of equals, statutory, voluntary and lived experience, all in that partnership together at the same level. To talk openly about power imbalances, so everybody brings power to a partnership, absolutely everyone who comes in. Some people misuse it quite badly, in terms of what's on the agenda or the way stuff is spoken about or what's up for discussion and what's not. So we try and kind of open up that power so that everyone can use their power in the best possible way. And we try and make it clear to people that, power is not a zero-sum game. So sort of giving away power to people shouldn't really deplete your power. It's not a one-size cake. In fact, if you give power to people, you can grow power in a partnership space. And we try and make sure that, we understand that lived experience has a massive power to bring to this. It's just a different kind of power to your directors and your commissioners in that space. We try and put co-production and trauma-informed work and strength-based work and intersectional approaches at the heart of what we do. Lots of people try and put that at the heart of their day-to-day service delivery, but we think it's really important for that also to be at the heart of partnership across the system. We try and spend time for people to get to know and understand each other on a personal level. So kind of why are you here today in this partnership? What is it about you that's brought you to this place, not your organisation, and how can you work together? We try and help partnerships to develop shared visions and common purposes and a culture that's comfortable with uncertainty and comfortable where people can actually really challenge and talk to each other in ways that allow them to really dig into what needs to be discussed. And there's a link there for a partnerships assessment tool that we use with some areas to kind of see how far along that journey they are. Once we've got that up and running, we try and develop these kind of new operational approaches that I talked about. There's lots of different models for it, the navigators, coordinators, embedded teams, but something that changes that situation for the individual, so it allows them to actually receive and feel a system that says, how can I help you move forward? How can we as a system help you move forward? Rather than, like I said earlier, this is what our service does, do you want to engage with it? Very, very cut and dry. At the heart of all of this is long-term relational support, so support that can really focus on people. And I loved your phrase about listening as kindness, and kind of really ensuring that, relational support is at the heart of everything that we do. Focused on people's strengths and trauma, as I mentioned, and on intersectionality, so understanding that everybody has a different experience of multiple disadvantage because of their political and social identities, and that services really need to do a lot more to understand that. Support that can work across services and transition points. So, how often is it the case that people lose support when they change their accommodation, or they go to prison, or they go to hospital and have to start again? So the support in MEMA is supposed to be long-term and to kind of support people over transitions. And importantly, we're trying also to coordinate services and not build new ones. So there is a risk here that you end up building a multiple disadvantage service, and then everyone in the system says, fantastic, take all the people that are a bit difficult for my service and put them in your new one. We're trying to avoid that as much as we possibly can by coordinating existing responses. Then we help areas to get into the system, as I talked about. So, what does the system look and feel like locally in your area? What do people experience in that system? How does an individual experience your system? What's good and bad about that experience? And then from that, what needs to change? So can you change the cultures of the workforce, the perceptions of the people in services, the way that thresholds operate, for example, and exclude people, the way that we deal with risk is completely wrong in our services, because we're using it as a way to exclude people from support. Can we change policies and commissioning structures that are driving the wrong kind of behaviours that we want to see in these systems? And can we get to a stage where we're focusing on the work that we're trying to do on a daily basis, and not a sense of sort of trying to raise the thresholds so we can manage what we're dealing with? From that, systems can begin to look at the kind of things that they want to prioritise in that system, and they can begin to take action in that sort of circular way that I described about taking action, being inquisitive, learning, adapting and repeating, and really sort of, as a group of people in the system, taking active steps to try something different in that space and see what they learn from it, bearing in mind that you're never going to reach a perfect solution, right? There isn't a perfect solution. All we're trying to do is edge the system forward to be better than it was before. And of course, there's a lot of challenges in this. And of course, the system will push back. So the minute you get a funding crisis, or the minute you get, actually, even when you get some new pieces of funding, people are often drawn away to go and focus on those bits of funding. You know, there's a new homelessness stream, quick, we better go and look at that. What's the outcome? Number of people through homelessness services, number of people off the streets. Well, doesn't work, does it? Because what you're trying to do is deal with people's problems as they see them, not as the funding stream wants to see them. And how often do we in our services define what people's root is? You know, oh, your biggest problem seems to be the thing that I'm commissioned to deal with, so therefore we're going to deal with that first. Well, maybe that's not the case. You know, maybe people need to deal with something else first. So trying to create systems that can have that flexibility in them to enable them to be different, and trying to ensure that the structure around those services allows that to happen in a normal way. It's hard though, right? So this is just a quick map that one of my colleagues drew a couple of years ago. You know, so somebody said, look, we want to create a CMHT that is accessible and effective for everybody. Well, there's a lot of different things you could start with, right? There's a lot of different things that you could choose to do. So as a partnership, which of those do you want to get into first? Which bit of the system are you going to pick to try and do some work on and to change? And finally, something about focusing on systems thinking behaviours. So if we're going to act in a systemic way, we have to get ourselves out of the way that we currently think and the way that we currently work. So the stuff on the left is kind of good behaviours of people that are thinking like systems thinkers. The stuff on the right is the stuff we all tend to do daily basis because we've been brought up to do that. And what I would argue is that, you know, this isn't an A or B. You know, you're not either a traditionalist or a systems thinker. It's a continuum across the piece, right? But when you find yourself falling into the red behaviours, which we often do, think about how we can shift them across towards the greener ones. So when we're thinking about services as separate and linear, why not start to think about what would be different if I thought about them as holistic and interrelated experiences? When you're focused on processes or policies or funding streams or kind of writing that next funding bid, what about if we tore that up and tried to focus on purpose as a driver of what we're trying to do? What if we went a step further and tried to focus on the common purpose of what us and our other agencies in our locality are trying to do? How would that change things for us? In our traditional world, you know, we've kind of seen to need to know all the answers, and especially for leaders in this space, you're supposed to have the answers. You know, you're supposed to be the person that knows what to do and where to take things. What about if we could turn that around to people being comfortable with uncertainty and promoting a progressive and kind of collaborative leadership in this space that wasn't all about individuals? Away from targets and goals towards trust and relationships, away from the optimal solution, there isn't one, as we've just talked about, towards step-by-step improvements for people and for services, and away from thinking about data as like, you know, well, the evaluation says this, so we must do it, towards data for learning. So the system seems to be telling us that when we do this, this happens. What does that tell us about what we should do next, rather than something which is much more narrowly focused. So we try and promote these and some other similar behaviours across the piece. Just to end, you know, what does our data say about what happens when people try and do this? So, you know, we have a year 4 evaluation which is just published last year. We have a year 5 that will come out hopefully next week or two as soon as I've finished reviewing it. We've got data from about 780 odd people that have been involved in this. We've supported over 2,000 people across the Meme Approach network over the last 4 years. Those areas have seen an 82% reduction in the rough sleeping for that cohort that they've been working with, so down from half of them at the beginning to 9% after a year's worth of support. Statistically significant reductions in A&E and nights in hospital, improvements to people's well-being, you know, arguably the most important part of this, as measured by a couple of tools, and then evidence of work to change systems. So our work is trying to understand what does it mean to change systems and what are people doing within those systems. So there's some good stuff in the year 4 report, and there's more to come in the year 5. Just a set of things that might be of interest to you. So like there's some links here to the Meme Approach areas, the evaluation, the reflections report I've mentioned, and our systems intervention support tool. There's also the Changing Futures programme, which is the government's response in England now to this, where they're working with 15 areas to develop these kinds of interventions, and me and Miss doing a lot of work to try and shape that into a program that's in the space to create change. But most importantly, what can you and your partners do about this? Because you can't solve this by yourself. So is there a way that you can go out and start working with some of your partners in local areas to think about how do we think about this as a system rather than a bunch of services, and what can we do to edge this forward? So that's everything from me. There's another nice quote from a systems thinker that says, to change the way we act, we must first change the way we think. And I think that that's an important part of today. So as you go through today, just think about the crossed arms, think about where the level of depth in which you're having the conversations, and thanks very much for your time.